They called it a victory. They called it the turning point of World War II. But if you had stood in the ruins of Stalingrad when the smoke finally cleared, if you had heard the way surviving soldiers spoke in hushed voices, as if afraid the city might still be listening, you'd know that victory came with a price no nation could ever repay. And the men who walked out of that frozen hell, they carried something with them the rest of the world never saw, something they couldn't put down, something that didn't stay behind when the firing stopped. Tonight on the History Sage, we're not asking how the Battle of Stalingrad was won. We're asking the question almost nobody dares to explore. What really became of the soldiers who lived through Stalingrad? And why did so many say survival felt like a second sentence? But before we begin this journey, I have one request. If stories like this matter to you, stories that reveal the human cost behind the headlines, then click like right now. Not for the algorithm, but to honor the people whose lives were shaped in ways history books rarely describe. Are you ready? Then step with me into the winter of 1942, a winter that never truly ended for the men who survived it. The first thing every survivor remembered wasn't the hunger. It wasn't the cold. It wasn't even the constant shelling that turned whole neighborhoods into smoke and splinters. It was the sky. A sky so black with ash that noon looked like twilight. A sky that made soldiers wonder, even decades later, if light had ever existed before the war, or if they had only imagined it. For the Soviet defenders trapped inside the city, every hour felt like a negotiation with death. For the German Sixth Army encircling them, the city became a maze of ghosts and snipers and buildings that swallowed men whole. But those who lived, those who somehow walked out, would spend the rest of their lives answering a question no outsider ever truly understood. Why did I survive when so many didn't? The answer changed depending on who you asked. Then every story begins in a different corner of the ruins. One Soviet soldier, a machinist named Yuri, told his grandson that after the war, the world felt too loud, too alive, too full of choices. He said that when you live for months knowing you might not see sunrise, the normal world feels unreal. Yuri survived because a piece of shrapnel struck the frozen can of soup in his coat instead of his lung. 1 inch to the left and his grandson would never have been born. But what happened to him after the war? He came home to a factory that treated him like a hero. For about 12 minutes, and he was just another worker trying to live on rations, trying to sleep through nights where he could still smell burning concrete. He never talked about the men he saw fall around him, not even once. His daughter said he would pause in the middle of hammering metal, stare into the distance and whisper, "I can still hear the Volga cracking." What does a man do with memories like that? Shift the scene to a captured German conscript named Matthias, who walked out of Stalingrad not into freedom but into a column of prisoners marching into the snow. People imagined that surviving the battle meant escaping its horrors. But for the German soldiers who lived, the worst came afterward. Most never returned home. Of the 91,000 prisoners taken by the Soviets, only around 5,000 ever saw Germany again. Some were 17, some were fathers. Some were men who thought the war would end before winter and packed summer uniforms. Matthias survived the march because another soldier, someone he barely knew, gave him half of his coat and then died the next morning. He never learned the soldier's name, but he remembered that half coat until he was 80, folded in the same trunk he kept by his bed. When he finally returned home in 1955, the world had rebuilt. His home did not. His childhood street didn't exist. Even his mother didn't recognize him at first because the boy she remembered had bright eyes. And the man who came home had the eyes of someone who had lived inside winter for 12 years. Not every survivor returned to silence. Some returned to medals, some returned to parades, some returned to lives they thought they'd pick up again, jobs, marriages, dreams that waited for them like unopened letters. But even they carried something heavy. The Soviet sniper, Lyudmila Pavlichenko, once said, "You might survive a war, but nobody leaves a battlefield the same person they were when they entered." Many Stalingrad veterans faced a new enemy the moment peace began. The expectation that they should move on. Move on from what? The starvation that hollowed their ribs? The frozen bodies that marked destroyed streets like mileposts? The friends they held in their arms as the city burned around them? Every survivor faced the same question. How do you start a new life when the frozen ruins of the old ones still live inside your head? One Soviet medic named Alina never married. She told neighbors she didn't want to bring children into a world capable of creating Stalingrad. She spent her life tending gardens, instead gardens she planted in perfectly straight rows, as if trying to organize a universe that once collapsed all around her. When she died, her diary revealed she still remembered the names of every wounded soldier she lost. Every single one. Hundreds of names. Written in precise handwriting, as if she were afraid the world might forget them if she didn't guard them alone. Why does a memory like that live so long? Because for survivors, forgetting felt like betrayal. Remembering felt like a burden, and either choice offered peace. But some survivors found new purpose. There was Victor, a Soviet artillery officer who spent the next 40 years teaching history. His students said he had an uncanny ability to make the past feel alive, as if he were describing events he'd witnessed yesterday. The truth? He didn't teach history because he loved textbooks. He taught because he wanted one thing more than anything, to make sure the world understood how fragile humanity is. His most famous lecture ended with the same line every year. The Battle of Stalingrad teaches us that the human spirit can survive fire, ice, and hunger. But it cannot survive forgetting. His students never realized the tremor in his voice wasn't emotion. It was memory. And then there were the soldiers who returned home physically whole but emotionally shattered. A Soviet infantryman named Oleg was well known in his village for sitting outside every morning, staring at the sunrise with a look people couldn't quite describe. His wife once said he was grateful for the sun, but he didn't trust it. He refused to sleep with the door closed. He never lit a fire unless absolutely necessary. And every New Year's Day, he placed a piece of black bread on the windowsill, a tribute to a friend who died beside him in a ruined factory. They nicknamed the oven. He lived to 91. But part of him never left that factory. Not really. On the German side, survivors struggled in a different way. Many returned to a country that didn't want to hear their stories. For some, silence became a second prison. Hans, a German mechanic, rarely spoke of the war at all. His son later said, "My father told me more about the weather than he did about Stalingrad." It wasn't shame. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper. A belief that the world could not possibly understand the weight he carried. But one night, late in life, Hans whispered something his family never forgot. He said, "I had a friend named Lucas. He died in the snow. Every year on his birthday, I hear him call my name. I always answer, I don't know why. Maybe because someone should." That single sentence revealed an entire lifetime of grief. Others rebuilt themselves from the ashes. Some German survivors became doctors, teachers, engineers. Some Soviet veterans became factory workers, writers, artists. Some found love and families. Some rebuilt cities that war had turned to rubble. Survival didn't make them weak. It made them observant. It made them humble. It made them deeply, almost painfully, human. And yet, even for the strongest, there was a moment late at night when the world grew quiet and the memories stepped out of the shadows. One survivor told a journalist in 1979, "Stalingrad never ends. No, it just sleeps. And sometimes it wakes up." As decades passed, the men who lived through Stalingrad grew old. White hair replaced ash-covered helmets, grandchildren replaced trenchmates, hospitals replaced bunkers, but even then, their stories still carried heat. A Soviet veteran named Sergei wept during an interview when asked what he remembered most. People expected him to talk about the fighting, the hunger, the cold. Instead, he said, the silence. The moment the guns stopped, we had survived. We didn't know what to do with that. Survival, he explained, felt like stepping into a world built for someone else. And then came something unexpected, a revelation shared by survivors on both sides of the battle. Many said the same thing, independent of each other. The enemy was the same as us, not in ideology, not in purpose, but in fear, in exhaustion, in the desperate longing to go home. A German soldier said he once saw a Soviet sniper lower his rifle for a moment. Just a moment when the wind exposed the frozen hands of a German private, swore the sniper hesitated out of pity. Then the battle resumed, and whatever mercy existed disappeared under the snow. But he never forgot that hesitation, and neither did the sniper. Decades later, when veterans from both sides met at peace ceremonies, many embraced. Some cried, some said nothing at all. Because what words could possibly exist for people who survived the same nightmare from opposite sides of the fire? So what truly became of the soldiers who lived through Stalingrad? Some became heroes, some became fathers, some became ghosts walking through cities rebuilt over their memories. Some carried silence like a second uniform. Some spent the rest of their lives protecting a world they hoped would never repeat what they had seen. But all of them, every last survivor, carried one truth. Survival was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a lifelong search for meaning. And here is the twist almost nobody talks about. Many survivors, in their final years, said the same haunting thing: I don't remember the battle anymore. I remember the people. Not the explosions, not the ruined buildings, not the orders shouted in the cold, but the faces of friends, small acts of kindness, the moments of humanity inside a place designed to erase it. In the end, Stalingrad was not defined by who won or who lost. It was defined by the people who walked out of it, spent the rest of their lives trying to understand why they were still here. A question that echoes even now. If this story moved you even a little, then let me take a moment to honor the men who carried these memories so we could learn from them. And if you want more forgotten human stories from the past, you're already in the right place. This is the History Sage, and I'll see you in the next chapter of history we were never meant to forget.